Today is the second of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's one of the most practical suggestions, I believe, amongst 7 very practical suggestions. And it's just this. If you're going to start something, if you want to do something excellent, begin with the end in mind. Now think about that for a moment. One of the things that a lot of times I do in my life is I just kind of jump into something. And then I find out there's a lot of work associated with it. And after a while, I just kind of give up. And the reason is I really haven't been thinking about the goal that I have in the first place. I've just jumped into the work. And we do that in a lot of areas. And there's a lot of areas that I suspect if we thought about it, we probably wouldn't just jump into it in the first place because we would realize that the goal wasn't that important anyway. But very often, some of the things that we start do have a very useful outcome, but we don't think about that. We just get bogged down in the work and all the effort that's associated with the task at hand, and sometimes we get discouraged or tired and we just give up. This is why it's so important to begin with the end in mind, and especially for Christians. In 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 9, it says, you're receiving the goal of your faith, the salvation of your souls. One of the things that Christians need to remember is that there is a goal, and that goal is salvation. We talked about motivation yesterday, being motivated because of our love for God and for Christ. And of course, this is one of the primary factors that we have in anything that we do. But once we start thinking about a worthwhile objective, we need to think about the reason we're doing it. We need to begin with the end in mind. I love our high school football coach here in Happy, Texas. As a matter of fact, all of our coaches are just excellent. But I was talking with our head coach this last summer, and he was talking about his vision for the young men that he works with. And he said, of course, we want to win. We want to win our games. We want to win district. We want to win the state championship if we can. But he said, that's not the most important thing to me. He said, the most important thing to me is making sure that these boys become good men. Well, that's his goal. And each year he starts out with that goal in mind. And so even though the winning is important, as anybody knows in any athletic endeavor or any other type of endeavor that you have that involves a contest and winners and losers, the most important thing is to make sure that we're producing good people. And I love that coach's comment. Winning's important, but the most important thing to me is to produce good men. Well, that is the goal. That's the outcome. And so he begins with that end in mind, and then he starts instilling the discipline in the team. And then he has certain standards for the team. He doesn't permit his team to criticize one another. If there's any criticism or correction that needs to be made, he'll take care of that. He's the coach. And he has some fine assistant coaches that are more than capable of doing that. So he doesn't allow the boys to continually pick at one another and complain and whine towards one another. And he also doesn't permit bad language. Well, you might think, wow, bad language goes hand in hand with football. How are you producing a football team or a bunch of Boy Scouts? And the answer is hopefully both. Because Boy Scouts have very high standards, don't they? Or at least they used to when I was a Boy Scout. But the idea is you want to produce good men, men who will be an asset to the community in which they're eventually going to live. Men who will make good husbands and good fathers, who will make good employees and employers. And so that's his goal, and it's a fine goal, and he begins with that end in mind. At the church I worship with, there's about 4 or 5 young people who have entered into a veterinary program, and it's a pretty involved program at that. It's one of the best in the state from what I understand, and it's a challenging program. And so they're going to be involved with this for quite a number of years. And the first call is pretty severe. When you go to make application for this veterinary school, they look at you in a lot of different areas. They want to make sure that you have the background to be able to get into a program such as this. They also want to make sure that you have the character that's necessary to finish it and to be good at what you do when you get finished with it. And then once you get into the program, the courses are very difficult. They're always having, it seems like a test almost every day, certainly every week. And the tests are hard. It's challenging to these young men and women. And if they don't keep the end in mind, if they don't begin with the end in mind, they want to be veterinarians for whatever reason that they decide, whether it's because they love animals and they want to help them, whether it's because this is a career they believe that is going to be conducive to the type of a life that they want to have. Whatever it is, they begin with the end in mind. I want to complete this course of study so that I can become a veterinarian. And so these 4 or 5 young men that we have out there are very intent upon that. But again, they began with the end in mind. They have a goal that is worthwhile, that will carry them through the years of effort and sacrifice and hard work. And it's the same for us, even on a more serious plane, when we talk about our Christian life. The goal of our faith is the salvation of our souls. And so Jesus, when he was talking to people about following him, he made it very clear that following him, being a disciple of Christ, was not going to be something that was going to be easy. And because of that, they needed to count the costs. In Luke chapter 14, in verse 28, he said he made this example. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Will he not first sit down and estimate the cost to see if he has enough money to complete it? For if he lays the foundation and is not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule him and say, "This fellow began to build and was not able to finish." Well, when it comes to being a Christian, it seems like the children of this world are very harsh upon them. Satan's children are the biggest hypocrites in the world, but boy, they will point out the hypocrisy in others quicker than anything else. They might fail to see it in their own lives, but they have a good hypocrisy detector when it comes to Christians. And so if they see a Christian that's not walking the walk, that's not living the life, well, they'll point that out. And if they see somebody who has turned their life over to Christ and just goes part way and then gives up, well, this becomes a source of ridicule. Not just for the person who quit following Christ, but it becomes a source of ridicule for the church. The people are weak, is the impression that they will get from the outside. And it becomes a bad reflection upon Christ himself, because his followers decided that it wasn't worth following. Jesus pointed out on several occasions that if you wanted to follow him, you're going to have to pick up your cross and follow him. Well, this was before he died on the cross, and so perhaps his followers didn't fully understand what he was talking about at first. But his point was, there are great sacrifices in following him. You have to give your life fully over to he and to God, and you have to live in their way. Just like the football players have to go by the football coach's standards, and just like these veterinarian students have to go by the school standards, there are standards that God has, and they're very high. They're demanding. They're sacrificial. Now, they're worthwhile without question, but you have to determine for yourself before you even begin this life for Christ if it's worth it to you. And if you don't begin with the end in mind, I want to be in heaven someday. I want to help as many people come into contact with Christ's shed blood and God's grace as I possibly can, so that they can be in heaven someday. This is our goal. This is the end that we are striving towards. It's the most noble endeavor that a man will ever undertake or a woman will ever undertake. But you have to be sold on it. You have to buy into the fact that Christianity is not only a good way, but that it's the best way. That we really are created by God, and therefore we owe him a life of service, whether we had a reward coming or not. But we do have a reward coming because of his great love for us. And if we can keep that end in mind at the very beginning, well, as we live this life and we go through the different ups and downs that life brings and the different challenges that life brings and the different sacrifices that are demanded of us, well, that will keep us going. And when we slip off that narrow path, it will help us to get back up and get back on that path. Because we have not just a goal, but we have a noble goal. The most noble goal that's ever been presented to mankind. To live for God now and to be with him forever in heaven, serving him. This is the end that we are going towards. And if we can keep that destination in mind, it's going to sustain us through the difficult times. We'll make a lot of mistakes, just like a football player is going to make a lot of mistakes in the different games that he will play. And just like a student is going to get a lot of things wrong on their quest to learning what they need to learn, Christians will slip from time to time. And that slipping involves sin, and that sin has consequence. And we have to realize that we have to give that up and get back on the path, that narrow path that leads to heaven. It's still going to be by God's grace and Christ's shed blood. But as always, we have our part to do, and that part is difficult. And God intended for it to be difficult, and Christ knew it would be difficult as he was talking to those who were thinking about following him. And his encouragement to them was count the costs. In this same passage, he talks about a king who's about to go to war. And he says that king is going to have to decide if he can win that war with half as many people as the enemy has. And if he decides he can't, he's going to have to go seek peace. War is a serious thing. When you start a war, you're committed, aren't you? And so you better make sure that the cause you have is just and noble and righteous. This is the type of counting of cost that Jesus wants us to do, expects us to do. And it's this type of accounting of a cost that will, again, that once we've determined, yes, everything that I will go through is going to be worth it to get to this noble goal, that will help you during the difficult challenges that life presents. This life is a test, and that test is not intended to be easy, but it is one in which we have the help of God himself all the way through. We're going to heaven, you and I, someday. This is our goal, and we need to begin with that end in mind if we're ever going to achieve it. But keeping that in mind, well, this life becomes pretty good. And then in the end, there's heaven. The second habit of highly effective people is this: to begin with the end in mind. Are you doing that? Well, that's the lesson for today. I hope it gives you something to consider. I really enjoyed Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and this is one of the ones that I believe is the most important. But until next time, I appreciate your tuning in, and I hope we'll see you tomorrow.